Before the jury filed into the courtroom today to hear testimony in the case of the people of the state of New York versus Donald J. Trump, Judge Juan Merchan issued his ruling to the lawyers of what would actually happen to Donald Trump if he were to testify in his own defense in this trial. Now, of course, before the judge issued his ruling about what evidence the prosecution would be allowed to use to attack Donald Trump's credibility as a witness, there was absolutely no reason to believe Donald Trump was going to actually testify in his own defense. Donald Trump is incapable of telling the truth, and that would become quickly obvious to the jury, who would probably find themselves watching Donald Trump commit perjury and probably concluding that they were watching him committing perjury. So there really was no chance that Donald Trump was going to testify. But here is what the judge ruled the prosecution could bring up if Donald Trump were to take the witness stand. The judge said that the prosecution could bring up the fact that, quote, the defendant was found to have violated executive laws, Section 63, by fraudulently misstating the value of his assets for an economic benefit. That's the Attorney General's case in New York. And that, quote, the defendant violated a court order by failing to remove an untrue, disparaging, and personally identifying post about the court's principal law clerk from the website donaldjtrump.com. The court fined the defendant $5,000. And the prosecution would be allowed to use the fact that, quote, the defendant was found to have intentionally violated a court order by making public attacks on the judge's law clerk, despite 2 prior court orders not to do so. The court fined the defendant $10,000. The judge also ruled that prosecutors would be able to bring up the fact that, quote, the defendant was found to have defamed E. Jean Carroll in public statements in 2019 by making false statements with actual malice. And that, quote, the defendant was found to have defamed E. Jean Carroll in public statements made in 2022 on Truth Social by making a false statement with actual malice. And the prosecution would be allowed to confront Donald Trump with the fact that, quote, the defendant stipulated to the dissolution of the Donald J. Trump Foundation to resolve claims by the New York Attorney General that he engaged in repeated and willful self-dealing transactions. So there really should be no suspense tonight about Donald Trump testifying in his own defense. He could not possibly survive questions about E. Jean Carroll, his public attacks on court personnel, with jurors sitting there in the room with court personnel, wondering if Donald Trump is going to attack those court personnel or those jurors themselves. And then there was another powerful indication that Donald Trump cannot testify in his own defense today. And that was when his defense lawyer testified for Donald Trump, saying this: I expect that you will learn that when Ms. Daniels threatened to go public with her false claim of a sexual encounter with President Trump back in 2008, that it was, as the people just said, very close to the election. And it was almost an attempt by Ms. Clifford, Ms. Daniels, to extort President Trump, to which the prosecutor said objection and the judge sustained. So there's Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer saying that Donald Trump never had a sexual encounter with Stormy Daniels, which Stormy Daniels has publicly described in detail. Donald Trump was alone in a hotel room with Stormy Daniels, while Donald Trump's wife was home with his 4-month-old son at the time. The only people who can testify about what happened in that room are Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump, not Donald Trump's defense lawyer. And Donald Trump is not going to testify. There will never be a moment when Donald Trump sits on that witness stand and says, I did not have sex with Stormy Daniels. And so today, Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer did it for him. Todd Blanche tried to get away with testifying for Donald Trump in his opening statement by saying that Stormy Daniels' description of her sexual encounter with Donald Trump is false. According to Stormy Daniels, who has spoken about it publicly many times, it was a sexual encounter that did not last long, and that in the pre and post sexual chatter, Donald Trump, among other things, compared Stormy Daniels to his oldest daughter. Stormy Daniels has given us plenty of detail about that. The essence of the Trump defense is that the $420,000 that was paid to Michael Cohen was paid for legal services having nothing to do with Stormy Daniels. Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyers told the jury, quote, "You will hear that he, Michael Cohen, did legal work for President Trump and the First Lady as his personal attorney. You will learn that each month in 2017, Michael Cohen sent an invoice to some of the employees at Trump Tower right here in Midtown for $35,000. And on this invoice, Michael Cohen described his work as payment to the retainer agreement for legal services rendered. The invoice was processed. Somebody at Trump Tower generated a check. The check was ultimately signed, and there was a record in a ledger on President Trump's personal records that reflected the invoice. For 9 of the checks, the check made its way down to the White House, and President Trump signed it. You'll hear that he's the only signatory of his personal checking account, which is why he signed the check. So what on earth is a crime? What is a crime about what I just described? The prosecution's answer to that question was that it was all, quote, a planned, coordinated, long-running conspiracy to influence the 2016 election to help Donald Trump get elected through illegal expenditures, to silence people who had something bad to say about his behavior using doctored corporate records and bank forms to conceal those payments along the way. It was election fraud, pure and simple. The prosecutors said, quote, "We will never know, and it doesn't matter if this conspiracy was the difference maker in a close election." And then the prosecution revealed a communication on election night 2016 between Stormy Daniels' lawyer and Dylan Howard at the National Enquirer, who was part of the conspiracy to suppress negative information about Donald Trump. The prosecutor told the jury, "You will also see evidence that on election night, as news outlets got closer to calling the election for Donald Trump, Keith Davidson, he was the lawyer for both Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, texted Dylan Howard at the National Enquirer, and he said, 'What have we done?' What do you think was going through your uncle's mind in that courtroom, and what he might be thinking tonight?
First and foremost, probably thank goodness I only sit here for 3 hours today. But other than that, he must know that it's not going well. And one of the things that I find really quite interesting is the extent to which he seems incapable of connecting with the jury. So I'm going to be very interested in seeing how that plays out. But more than anything else, Lawrence, and I know other people have commented on it, but it's incredibly important. It's the extent to which has no control over the situation, and he needs control in order to project the image that he's been able to project for so long. Without that control, it all falls apart. I mean, we know that Donald is a very weak person, or at least some of us know that, and that his ego is a very fragile thing that needs to be bolstered in every moment. He needs the rallies. He needs the applause in the dining room at Mar-a-Lago, because he knows deep down he's nothing of what he claims to be. You know, he's just this frightened little boy. But with the help of a lot of smoke and mirrors and sycophants, he's been able to convince other people and himself that he's actually a successful, tough killer. And, you know, we hear that word come up, but it's a very important word in Donald's psychological history. And without the control, without being able to control the lighting or the temperature, without being able to leave or use his phone without permission, which he probably wouldn't get, it all starts to unravel. And what I think we're going to see in terms of his desperation in his hallway rants before and after, and his inability to stop glaring at people, or his inability to connect with the people who have, in some sense, his future in their hands, that he can't kid himself anymore about his power and his place and his privilege. And what's probably even worse, he can't kid anybody else either, and he knows it.
I have the feeling he's always been wrong about how he comes across to people, by which I mean, I know some people were completely charmed by him and liked him. I mean this in the pre-politician era. But he always came across as, just as Spy Magazine called him, a vulgarian, which I always thought was the perfect, if you were allowed a single adjective about Donald Trump. This is a very, very small-minded vulgarian, and certainly what I've always thought about him. He could never have, charmed me in any way, and most people I know. But he doesn't know that. He never had any idea that there were people who were not just immune to him, but took an active dislike for what he obviously represented. And so his disconnect from the jury must also include this mistake he's made his whole life of thinking that everybody thinks I'm great.
Yeah, and listen, he's had a lot of help. Fragile systems bend towards the most dysfunctional person in them. And we've seen this time after time in Donald's life. The ground zero for this was my family, of course. And then it was the Republican Party. And then it was the DOJ, both in his administration and in President Biden's administration. Time after time after time, we've seen that people in those systems make a choice, whether it's Aileen Cannon or Bill Barr or the Supreme Court or Merrick Garland, whether it's out of fear or favor, they intentionally or not, consciously or not, come down on the side of protecting or elevating Donald Trump. So it's not any wonder that he would think that he would be able to control any situation he's in. And that's why we're going to be seeing some very potentially disturbing behavior from him in the courtroom and outside of it. And, after 4 or 5 days, it's already manifesting itself.
Yeah, I mean, he's attacking the jury tonight. He's attacked the jury once before in a direct violation of the gag order on him. And that's the first thing the judge has to rule on tomorrow, is how much has Donald Trump violated that gag order.
Yeah, and Judge Merchan is in a similar situation in deciding what side, I shouldn't put it that way, what kind of decision he's going to make. Is he, as Andrew Weissman suggests he should, not going to judge out of fear or favor? And that's what should happen, because the whole idea that Donald is a victim here of anybody but himself, or the whole idea that the system is rigged against him and that it's much more fair to everybody else, is just laughably absurd, of course. And it's about time that this madness stop, because we know that Donald endangers people's lives. And we know that as you pointed out earlier, we've already seen that there are jurors who are understandably quite concerned about how this trial and their participation in it, their willingness to do their civic duty, may put themselves in harm's way, which is just unacceptable.
So Donald Trump's defense lawyer, Todd Blanche, said this in his opening statement today. He's not just Donald Trump that you've seen on TV and read about and seen photos of. He's also a man. He's a husband. He's a father. And he's a person, just like you and just like me. Now, I don't know why he didn't include uncle, since you're out there. But so this point about he's a husband and a father, that's the first time. And I've been in a lot of criminal courtrooms watching trials. That's the first time I have seen a criminal defense lawyer describe his client as a husband and a father without without having the wife and the children in the front row of the courtroom. This is something that I've never seen not actually made manifest in the courtroom before. Donald Trump's in that courtroom alone. Jeffrey Dahmer's parents were there every single day. It is very hard to find a courtroom where the criminal defendant doesn't have a relative sitting there in the front row.
Yeah, well, a couple of things about that. First of all, it's another example of how he perverts systems or expectations. For anybody else, that would just be damning, right? Just the way he talks about dogs would be damning. How many times have we heard that his bizarre behavior, that he engages in bizarre behaviors or just doesn't conform in a way that a reasonably well-adjusted human being would, but like everything else about him, it just kind of gets baked in, right? But it's worth pausing about how unfair, unreal, bizarre, strange, unacceptable, weird, whatever adjective you want to use, it is that he is there alone in terms of friends and family. I think it is worth pointing out, one, I don't think he cares. I don't think it matters to him. That is not where he gets his energy. That is not what gives him solace to the extent that anything does. He's more upset about the fact that there aren't more people outside protesting on his behalf, right? But it also points to the bizarre thing about my family, that every transaction in this family is a transactional one. I'm sorry, every relationship, I should say, is a transactional one. His kids have decided, for whatever reason, that it's not worth their time for them to be in that courtroom because they're not going to get anything out of it. That's the way this family rolls.
I wanted to take a look at that courtroom drawing of your uncle falling asleep in the courtroom. And you know he's consuming all of this news information about the trial. But when he looks at that courtroom drawing of himself, what does he feel when he sees that?
Just an unbearable vulnerability. Again, to get back to the whole killer vernacular, my grandfather needed a son to be a killer. My father did not fulfill those criteria. So it was up to Donald, even though he knows on some very deep level that he is anything but. But in my family, and according to my grandfather, being a killer meant being invulnerable. It is unacceptable, not just to admit you're vulnerable, but to have any vulnerability. That picture is Donald's worst nightmare.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.